we're developing, through technology, an ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint. What does that mean? That's where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
Hello, Endeavor here. Once upon a time, I worked a remote job with a company on the internet. The job was entirely online, meaning I never actually interacted with those who ran the company or other employees in person. As to not give away too much, I'm not going to name the company or say exactly what the job was, but the way the work was structured is that you'd be assigned clients from a network and you'd provide services for them via the internet. Now, this company had one fatal flaw which both job review forums and employee forums on the website itself complained about. That fatal flaw was a rating system which the company had for its employees. The way it worked was that once you provided a service for a client, they would give you a rating out of 10. Employees needed to maintain an average rating of at least 9.5, and any rating below 5 was considered to be a complaint. If you received more than 2 complaints, that being ratings under 5 for the last 50 services you had provided, or if your average fell below 9.5, you could be suspended and potentially fired. What this created within the company was a constant state of terror, that you were always one small mistake away from being fired. You know, when you read reviews for products online, most of the ratings are either 5 stars or 1 stars, and there are very few that fall in between, with the usual review just stating awesome or horrible. Well, imagine yourself being rated like that, and your job depends on it. Another problem was that the scores were color-coded with green, yellow, and red. Both 10 and 9 were green, which led clients to believe that giving you a 9 out of 10 meant they were giving you a good review. While in reality, only a 10 really constitutes a good review because you need to maintain an average of 9.5. So anything below 10 would reduce your average below the required score. When you received a 10, you didn't feel accomplished at all. All you felt when you received the best score was relieved. Any score below 10 out of 10 was considered a bad score. The only difference was the degree to how bad it was. Working under such a merciless system was akin to walking across a frozen lake on very thin ice. Each step you take has you terrified that the ice will break beneath your feet. When it doesn't break, all you feel is a small sense of relief before you take your next step and go through the same horror again. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, I think that working for this company gave me a small taste of what life would be like living under a social credit system. Over the past decade, the concept of a social credit system has been discussed at lengths across the political spectrum, both in the mainstream and alternative media. A social credit system is essentially a scheme where individuals or organizations are awarded points for whatever the system deems good behavior, and deducted points for whatever is deemed bad behavior. Privileges are either awarded or denied based on one's score under the scheme. A social credit system would make extensive use of modern technology to gather and store data, score participants according to the scheme, and allocate rewards or punishments. The increased awareness and intrigue into the idea of a social credit system stems from the implementation of such a system in China. Over the past several years, China has begun implementing social credit systems throughout the country for both businesses and individuals. People can gain standing under the scheme by doing what is deemed good deeds, such as donating blood, doing charity work, having good financial credit, and praising the government. They can lose standing by breaking traffic rules, spreading rumors, booking tables at restaurants or rooms in hotels and not showing up, or engaging in anti-government protests. Rewards for good social credit include tax breaks, cheaper public transport, fast tracks to promotion at work, or even shorter hospital wait times. Punishments for bad social credit include restricted access to social services, ineligibility for government jobs, public shaming, or even being barred from purchasing a plane or train ticket. As soon as the concept of social credit systems entered the public consciousness in Western countries, it immediately became a mainstay in the realm of dystopian fiction. Probably the most famous example of this is Nosedive, an episode from the popular TV show Black Mirror, released in 2016. The premise of the episode is that in a not too distant future, people use their smartphones to rate each other's social interactions on a scale from 1 to 5. One's social standing is determined by their average rating out of 5. The higher one's rating is, the more access they have to the benefits of the technocratic society. This results in every human action among high-rated individuals being plastered over with a fake veneer of positivity in hopes of maintaining a high rating. A young woman named Lacey, played by Bryce Dallas Howard, is driven to the point of insanity in her desperate attempt to raise her rating from 4.2 to 4.5. I found the rating system of the company I worked at, which I discussed at the beginning of the video, eerily similar to this episode of Black Mirror. It goes without saying that a social credit system would be a dream come true for every totalitarian despot. The potential for control such a system would offer would be endless. However, I don't actually think a social credit system of the same nature as the one being implemented in China will come to Western countries. The first reason for this is because the West has been consumed by postmodernism. The Chinese social credit system, as dystopian as it is, still relies on a definitive understanding of morality. I'm by no means trying to defend such a system, but it is designed to facilitate what traditionally would have been considered pro-social behavior. The health of wider Chinese society is the goal of the system, even though I firmly disagree that it would actually achieve that. In the West, however, we've lost all understanding of objective morality beyond adherence to globalist ideology. All we're left with now is moral relativism. Our moral framework has been deconstructed to such an extent that, in response to the proposition of such a system, people would be stuck with questions like, but what is good behavior? Or, well, what really is good for society? The answer to these questions would have been obvious to anyone living in a society with a clear and coherent moral foundation, but in postmodernity, no such framework exists. Secondly, Western elites don't appear to want what the Chinese social credit system is designed to bring about. Every policy they pass seems designed to deliberately facilitate decline as fast as possible. So they aren't interested in encouraging pro-social behavior among the public. In many ways, they actually have a vested interest in encouraging the public to engage in anti-social behavior. The only thing Western elites care about in this regard is that the public is compliant to their agenda and adherent to global homo ideology. For these reasons, I think it's much more likely that if a social credit system were implemented in Western countries, it would be justified as a response to a perceived outside threat, much like the tyranny which the pandemic brought about was. It appears that the perceived threat that would justify this is climate change, and the social credit system would come in the form of a carbon credit system. Now, before I get into why I think this would be the case and what kind of world this would create, I need to address an irritating trend which has developed in this sphere of the internet over the past 3 years. That is the accusation of conspiracy theorist or schizo, which is often lobbied at commentators who speculate about future developments of the system by certain segments of the online right. If you say something is possible in the future, but you don't predict it with 100% accuracy to the day, you'll often be accused of being a grifter, controlled opposition, or so-called schizo by certain individuals. So, I need to clarify that I'm not saying that a carbon credit score is certain to happen, and I'm not setting a date for which I predict it will be implemented. What I want to do is, first, present a case for why I think it is possible in the future, and second, I want to imagine what life under such a system would look like. I don't think that it's a foregone conclusion, and I certainly hope that it never happens. If a carbon credit score never comes into fruition, then this video can simply serve as a thought experiment on what life under a theoretical dystopia would look like. The reason I think such a system is possible is that a large portion of the elite want it. The guy in the clip I played at the beginning was J. Michael Evans, the president of the Chinese firm Alibaba and former Goldman Sachs banker speaking at Davos in 2022. Net zero carbon emissions is a goal of both the World Economic Forum and one of the UN's Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. In addition, pretty much every globalist-backed politician has vowed that their country will meet these goals. Secondly, precedent for a carbon credit system already exists among corporations. Corporations already function under what is in effect a social credit system known as environmental, social, and corporate governance, or ESG. ESG is a score assigned to corporations which rates them based on their compliance to a criteria very similar to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It also rates them based on things like diversity, equity, and inclusion, i.e. the extent to which corporations enforce anti-white woke ideology. ESG scores determine which corporations will receive investment from mega firms like BlackRock or Vanguard, and which ones will not. In effect, ESG is designed to concentrate investment in firms which advance the globalist agenda. There also exists a carbon market among international companies. In accordance with UN treaties such as the Kyoto Protocol, companies are given an allowance for the amount of carbon they emit. Under this kind of scheme, companies are allowed to buy or sell carbon credits. They can buy them if they emit greater than their allowance and sell them if they engage in activities that offset their emissions. Basically, this scheme allows big corporations who have the resources to buy carbon credits and conform to ESG to outcompete smaller companies who can't afford to do so, which results in wealth being concentrated in a smaller number of massive global corporations. Thirdly, the final reason I think an individual carbon credit system is possible for the future is that the technology for such a system already exists. For example, MasterCard has developed a credit card which is able to track your personal carbon emissions based on what you purchase. Again, going back to the clip at the beginning of the video, the president of Alibaba says that they're developing such a system for their customers. The technology which would allow all governments to enforce a carbon credit score also exists. It can be done through central bank digital currency, or CBDC. This is a digital currency which can be programmed in order to restrict its use, meaning it can be programmed to not allow people to spend more than their allocated number of carbon credits. All of this technology can be synthesized in a digital ID, another thing which governments around the world are working on implementing. Not only that, but products are already beginning to be presented to consumers in a way that suggests a carbon credit system is on the way. My heart dropped last year when I was looking for plane tickets on Google Flights and noticed that Google now lists whether a flight has above or below average carbon emissions. Some products now sold in grocery stores list whether it is a high or a low emissions product. Amazon now asks you if you wish to pay more in order to use a lower emissions means of shipping. No one I have ever met in my life would decide to pay more for a product because of the carbon emissions. I have never met a person who would actually care about that. So why are they listing this? My theory is that, while they might not care about it now, a system is in the works under which they would be made to care about this. For these reasons, I think the implementation of a carbon credit system in Western countries is a very real possibility for the not too distant future. Now, I'll be veering more into speculation here, but I'm going to try to envision how this system would actually work. It's likely that an individual would be issued an allowance of a set number of personal carbon credits monthly or annually. This would be calculated within a digital ID, which would also act as a wallet using CBDC. Your digital ID would allow or deny purchases based on your balance of money and your balance of carbon credits. Carbon credits would put a cap on the net emissions of a given population, as there would only be a finite number of carbon credits for that population. Carbon credits would be a tradable commodity, so you could trade them for money, meaning they would act as a kind of universal basic income, especially if many jobs are planned to be phased out. And if you think that UBI would be awesome, you could just sit around all day collecting money, consider first that it would be via CBDC, meaning central banks could restrict what you're able to purchase. It's also worth remembering that prisoners don't have jobs and get food and housing provided for them too. Secondly, you would have to sell your carbon credits, which would only give you enough to afford low quality, low emissions food and housing, while those wealthy enough to buy additional carbon credits would have access to much higher quality goods and services. This is how, under a so-called sustainable economy, people like Bill Gates will be flying around the world on a private jet while you're stuck in the pod eating bugs in your 15-minute city. I need to repeat that I'm not predicting such a system or its minute details with any certainty. I'm simply trying to envision how it would function if these agendas, which have considerable elite support, are successfully implemented. Now, I want to imagine what life would be like under such a system. In short, a carbon credit system would create one of the worst dystopias imaginable. It's easy to look at the concept of a carbon credit system as a scheme designed to impoverish the populations of Western countries, while maintaining the standard of living of the elites, which it is. But in practice, it would be much worse than just that. I do see a way out of this that doesn't involve you living in a pod and eating bugs, but I can't see how the standard of living that we are used to can be maintained if the system which created it now wishes to take that away. So the biggest problem with a carbon credit score isn't that it would decrease material wealth. In addition to that, there is something much worse. The real thing which is truly dystopian about this proposed system is that it would elevate every single minute aspect of one's life to the level of an existential crisis. Things as simple as buying groceries or traveling to visit a friend would be amplified to the degree that they would almost become life or death decisions, as you desperately try to stay under your allotted amount of carbon emissions for the month. In addition, if ESG scores are a model for the system which the elites want individuals to live under, under, not only the environmental dimension, but the social would also be incorporated into the system too, meaning the morality of wokeism would also be factored in when determining someone's score under the system. So, opposing the anti-white or the LGBT agendas, or simply questioning the validity of the carbon credit system itself, could also be grounds for disabling your access to amenities. With CBDC integrated into a digital ID, that could very easily be done. This kind of system would be ideal for crushing any dissent from within. The life this system would create would be one lived under a constant state of alarm. Going back to my example from the beginning of the video, it would be like that, but for everything. Your entire life would feel like walking across a layer of thin ice which could collapse under your feet at any second, sending you to your doom. Each small action which was once ordinary and routine in your day-to-day life would now instill a fear into you akin to taking another step on the thin ice, hoping to God that the ice doesn't break. Over the past 3 years, the ethos of the entire globalized world has become one of a perpetual state of crisis. And this is deliberately being inculcated through the global media. It's easy to see how such alarmism plays into the climate agenda. There is no greater crisis than the supposed end of the world. In recent years, I've noticed a small but significant change in the mainstream discourse surrounding the environment. It's that the word pollution is no longer used. It has been replaced by the word emissions. The reason for this is that the word pollution conjures in the mind images of coal-burning factories and freeways jam-packed with thousands of cars and trucks. People don't typically associate things like buying groceries with causing pollution. The word emissions, on the other hand, pathologizes all human activity. It effectively instills a sense of fear and guilt over what were once menial daily tasks. And it seems that this is being done in preparation for a system under which you will be judged on this basis. It has been said for years that modern life tends to cause people a great deal of anxiety. Having to live your life constantly conscious of your carbon credit score would multiply that anxiety tenfold. And this system would be everywhere, in your face, controlling every aspect of your life. Because everything you did, including what you ate, where you went, what equipment you used, everything would be logged by your digital ID into a massive database, which would then determine your standing under the system. So you would never be able to get a break from the feeling that you're being watched and scrutinized, and that judgment would be passed upon you later. We already saw a precursor to this kind of system during the pandemic, and I need not remind you how much of a nightmare that was. Not the actual virus, the system that it was used to bring in. It would be like that, but even more invasive, and it would have no end. The intention is to make life under such conditions permanent. And much like we saw during the pandemic, and like we've seen with political correctness or wokeness for decades, a new morality would be created to support this system, which would be evangelized by the mainstream media, big tech, and the academy. So the public would be encouraged to lambast anyone who went against the system as a horrible person who doesn't care about the planet. The so-called woke, those who use the morality of political correctness as a hammer to inflict suffering on those the system permits them to, had the time of their lives during the pandemic. Never before had they been given so much power to torment others with the complete backing of the system and to consider themselves virtuous people for doing so. A sustainable development regime would be a dream come true for them. If you thought they were obnoxious before, just imagine how they would be under such a system. Now, there are two responses that I would receive from those who would promote a carbon credit system, or sustainable development as they refer to it. First, they would say to me that such a system is necessary in order to save the planet. Second, they would say that I am not a climatologist, meaning I am not qualified to question the science, which is the consensus among the experts. The latter claim is true. I am not a scientist of any kind. I do not have a PhD in environmental sustainability, and I have never conducted an extensive and well-funded study into the effects of carbon emissions upon the Earth's climate. So instead, I'm going to rely on a wager. First of all, who are the people claiming that we need such a system to save the planet? Contrary to what they will have you believe, science is not an objective and infallible truth-giving entity. Scientific consensus is contingent on those who fund, conduct, and report upon research. Those who are funding this research are not neutral. They clearly have a self-serving globalist agenda, and the institutions which they fund will yield them the results that they want. Not only that, but these same institutions have been wrong about almost everything for the past 50 years. They were wrong about the pandemic. They were wrong about the safety and effectiveness of a certain needle which they injected into the masses. They were wrong about all the other environmental scares they pushed over the past 50 years. And today, they are wrong about race, gender, sex, culture, human nature, and a ton of other things. The end result of everything they push is always an increase in the power of globalist elites. Furthermore, their own actions run contrary to the narratives they themselves are presenting around climate change. Like, for example, these elites say that carbon emissions will cause environmental catastrophe and that developed Western countries emit a disproportionate amount of carbon in comparison to the Third World. Simultaneously, they're importing tens of millions of people from the Third World into Western countries. If Western countries were responsible for climate change and the great majority of population growth in Western countries is a result of immigration, the solution would clearly be to end all immigration into the West, but as we know, they aren't going to do that. So the institutions pushing climate alarmism are not worthy of your trust. I don't care how much money they have behind them. Secondly, the solution they are proposing is to enslave humanity under the most nightmarish of dystopias. If mankind was forced to live like this, would the planet even be worth saving? So what we have is an elite who we know to be self-serving and pathological liars telling us that we must surrender all our dignity, property, and freedoms, and imprison ourselves in their digital gulag, or else, I don't know, the weather will be hot in the Saharan desert, or there will be cyclones in Southeast Asia. I'm not even going to entertain such a proposal for a minute. I'm just going to wager that the world will not be destroyed and resist such a system with every ounce of my being, because I would rather die than live in such hell. And ultimately, in order to resist such a system, if it in fact comes into fruition as many within the elite hope, a line in the sand must be drawn. Much like how many out there, myself included, drew a line in the sand during the pandemic from which we would not back down. Disconnecting from such a dystopian carbon credit system would be worth it, no matter what modern amenities you lost access to as a result. Over the past century, we've become so used to the comforts of modern society. During the pandemic, those were taken away from us and used as bait in order to get us to comply with the next phase of the globalist agenda. Over the past century, we've become so used to the comforts of modern society. During the pandemic, they were taken away from us and used as bait to get us to comply with the next phase of the globalist agenda. We all remember the point that we were put under extreme coercion in order to get us to take a certain injection. For me, it was never a question of whether I would comply or not. I got to the point where I wasn't afraid of the consequences of non-compliance because my own self-respect was worth more than whatever I stood to lose. I couldn't have lived with myself if I had given in to such tyranny. And for me, those days really put into perspective what really makes for a good life. It isn't the material abundance of the modern world. I could live without that. It made me realize just how much more important maintaining a healthy soul is than all the material comfort in the world. The climate agenda will be the same test, but on a much greater scale. It is designed to impoverish the populations of Western countries and offer the most minimal and degrading means of sustenance, presented as generous relief in return for enslaving oneself into a technocratic grid. If that is the direction which the system takes, then we will lose access to many of the material luxuries which globalism has brought us. There's no way around that. So the question becomes, what is more valuable to you? The slop which the globalists offer you in return for your servitude, or your own freedom, dignity, and peace of mind? For me, the answer is clear. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, please follow me on Odysee as well, because it's important that we support alt tech. You can follow me on Telegram, and if you'd like to support my channel with a donation, you can do that too. All links are down below. Thank you for listening. Till next time, endeavor.